The Jaguars rule the roost in the AFC South. We've got Kyren Williams coming in with a bang and an instant classic in Philly. All coming up next on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen as we break down all things important from Week 12 and a couple unimportant things as well. Nick, congratulations. Big win for your Jaguars. How was your Thanksgiving? How are you doing? How was your Week 12?
It was great, man. It was great. I kind of enjoyed the way that these games were spread out, right? We obviously had the first ever Black Friday game, which was a nice little treat on Friday. Had a full NBA slate for the most part during the week. You got a bunch of college basketball going on. Thanksgiving week, I think, is underrated in the grand conversation of like best sporting times of the year. But yeah, really fun Sunday slate, and not having any of these teams on bye was huge. We got 6 teams on bye coming up in week 13. So despite having 3 games Thursday, 1 on Friday, the usual Sunday, Monday slate, like it still felt like we had the full, Sunday early slate, 4 games in the late slate. But yeah, a lot of fun. I'll save my Jags thoughts for when we get into that game. I wish that Joe Burrow was at 100% because boy, would we be set up for a showdown in Jacksonville this coming Monday.
Epic podcast XM show grudge match, but instead it's not going to be very epic at all. But we are going to start right off with your Jaguars and Texans because that was the game of the early slate yesterday. The one with only really any sort of heft. It was maybe not the only one, but it was the biggest one by far. Let's just jump right into it there. So right away, I mean, Jacksonville took care of business right from the word go in this one. I was impressed, and what I was it ended up being a closer score at the end, but all in all, I mean, Jacksonville was the better team.
I thought so. Yet, being a kind of self-hating Jaguars fan, or more so expecting the worst at all times Jaguars fan, I'm texting my buddies during that last Texans drive being like, all right, worst case scenario, Texans are getting a field goal here. Worst case scenario for me, they're scoring a game-winning touchdown. Like at no point did I really have full faith or let myself believe that the Jags were actually going to close that out. And they came within 3 inches. If that ball hits just a little bit deeper on the crossbar, it probably bounces in instead of out. From going to overtime. And, the way the Texans offense was starting to pick up steam, I don't think that was a scenario the Jags wanted, especially on the road. But weird game overall. Jacksonville jumps out to a 2-score lead early on. I thought they missed some pretty big opportunities to really extend that lead. Obviously, the strange decision, I thought, in some ways, to not just take the free points at the end of the half. I mean, you're not necessarily expecting to even be in that position, right? You're not necessarily thinking that Christian Kirk is going to rip off like a 55-yard catch and run that brings him down to the 1-yard line. So to me, I'm thinking, all right, make this a 2-score game. Take the 3 points. They're going to matter later on. And instead, I don't necessarily hate the idea of going for it. I didn't like the call, though, right?
I hated the call.
Kind of this like stretch toss type of play to ETN. And he's, ETN's just not the type of guy that's going to make multiple defenders miss when he doesn't have a running start. It was poorly blocked. The Texans were ready for it. I don't have a better play call. I'm not an NFL play caller, but didn't really love that one. I mean, the way that they've been so effective with the Trevor Lawrence QB sneaks this season, whether it's at the goal line, like we saw with Lawrence reaching over for his 3rd rushing touchdown in the last 2 weeks, or just picking up, 3rd, 4th, and shorts. Like that's kind of been their go-to play, especially the last few weeks. And I thought that would have been a good spot to roll that out. But, they left some points on the board for sure. We had the Calvin Ridley weekly touchdown drop in the back of the end zone on a dime from Trevor Lawrence. Christian Kirk had a huge drop late in the game. It was just kind of one of those instances. I don't know if you were watching this one live or on Red Zone, Jeff, where it was a great throw from Lawrence, great route by Kirk, but it brought him like right into the one spot on the field where the windows at the Texan Stadium allow the sun to shine through. So like it's on Kirk. You got to bring that in, but it was also thrown like where the sun was directly in his eyes. So it was, for as big of a day as it was for Trevor Lawrence, I think you could argue this was his best game of the season, maybe of his career, in terms of generating big plays. It could have been even bigger. I mean, the Jags left at least 1 touchdown and probably 60 to 70 yards on the table in drops.
Yeah, Houston has that issue. I didn't realize they did, but Indy and Dallas always have that issue at the indoor stadium and the light coming through and blinding you. Dallas is notorious for that on like Thanksgiving and things like that. But yeah, it was weird. Yeah, you think Peterson would have drawn up the Duval special instead of just the run up to the line, hurry and snap it when you're not rushed. It wasn't like there was a running clock here.
Yeah.
And then that outside run, especially because ETN hadn't been running the ball very well. In fact, neither team ran the ball worth a damn at all in this game. Houston didn't even try. We'll get to them in a second here, but yeah, it was an odd play call. I didn't like it either. I would have liked to seen some sort of Lawrence run pass option, but easier said than done, I guess. But yeah, and yet Jacksonville was the better team. It's so funny because Ridley was not even like a notion in the first half.
Right.
I think all of his targets came in the second half, maybe one target before halftime. And then in the second half, he goes off and he goes 5 for 89. So you get yours. But we thought it was going to be like the New Orleans game all over again, where Kirk's going off and we didn't even have some of the other guys around. Who's my favorite? Guy I always
Jamal Agnew.
Yes, and Agnew's on the
well, he's injured, thankfully.
Yeah.
So the fumbles have not been an issue for him. But no, you're right. I mean, the drop touchdown did come with about 2.5 minutes left in the second quarter. So that would have been the big one for Ridley. But he got in on the action in the second half. Ended up being the Jags' leading receiver, 5 for 89 and a touchdown, and a nice slant route on a third down. Ended up getting the 2-point conversion just after that as well. So he kind of was able to bounce back from the drop, and you could tell. I mean, it's eating at him. Like, I think he knows the narrative, right? I mean, he slammed his helmet down. He was distraught on the bench. Like, I don't think this was one where, I saw some commentary on Twitter. It's like, well, it's a slight overthrow by Trevor Lawrence. I mean, it's basically the same discussion that we had with Valdez-Scantling this past week with Kansas City. It's like, yeah, it's not a 100 out of 100 catch, but if you're an elite receiver like Calvin Ridley, or you're supposed to be an elite receiver, that's a catch you got to make. But, I think one of the biggest stories from this game is both offenses, I thought, and especially Jacksonville, were exceptionally well prepared and especially well schemed in the passing game. I mean, there were big plays all over the place for both sides. I mean, Trevor Lawrence had 7 completions for 180 yards just on passes that traveled at least 10 air yards. And that's not counting, some of the long catches and runs that they had in this game. 9 players across both teams had a catch of at least 20 yards. 4 different Jaguars had a catch of at least 40 yards.
Yep. And the thing is, like, after the Niners game, there was a lot of hand wringing. There was a lot of, okay, he's not a top 10 quarterback. He's not a top 10 fantasy quarterback for sure.
Yeah.
And then the last 2 weeks, he's gone off. At halftime, he had over 200 yards. None to Ridley. That was the thing that was pretty amazing too, that they were able to do that. They got on track together in the second half. Good timing indeed. They come on strong here at the end of the season. Fantasy playoffs around the corner. If you're alive and you've got him, he's pretty much a comfortable start going forward there. Big matchup at home against Cincy on Monday night coming up, and a reeling Bengals team that just gave up over 400 yards to the Steelers, which we know is a significant number. We'll get to that. I don't really want to dwell on that right now. I will say Dearness Johnson isn't a bad speculative pickup right now, because ETN left briefly. And he's clearly the number 2 guy in line. Bigsby is just a rumor now. Johnson had that 142-yard catch. That was huge. On the Houston side of things, Devin Singletary, 6 carries. Dameon Pierce, 5 carries. Singletary had been running the ball so well. That was one of the things that had kind of changed for this Houston offense. And they gave up on this in a hurry. Now, is it because of the game flow? Is this, I mean, you're obviously watching every snap of this game. They were behind most of the time, and Jacksonville does stop the run very well. Was this just like a game flow opponent sort of thing? What's your take on this?
I think it was a little bit of both, but mostly game flow, right? I mean, neither Singletary nor Pierce were overly effective early on when they tried to get the run going. I mean, I think they combined for about 2.9 yards per carry, and Jacksonville led, I wouldn't say comfortably, but by 1 to 2 scores basically the entire game. So Houston was in catch-up mode, and it was especially obvious in the second half where, multiple like third and even fourth and short situations, Houston's lining up in shotgun, and they're, motioning the back out. Like, they weren't even feigning the run at any point. But we did see CJ Stroud, get loose, 6 for 47 and a rushing touchdown for him. I mean, I remain just amazed. Like, he took 4 sacks in this game, and 2 of them were huge at the end by Josh Allen, who is very quietly, pushing for probably a second team All-Pro spot season. I mean, he is single-handedly keeping that Jags defensive line intact. The Jags got a ton of pressure throughout this game. They were just like constantly overrunning CJ Stroud. Trayvon Walker had like 5 chances, I thought, to sack Stroud and just kind of missed. And Stroud's ability to, he's not like Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen or anything like that, but he's just so calm at all times. Like it's not, rolling out all over the place and, doubling back and it's, scrambling around. It's more just these subtle movements in the pocket to create space. I came away even more impressed with Stroud than I already was. Really nice day for him, 26 of 36 for 2 touchdowns. I mean, it says a lot that at the end of the game, when they're down 3, like I'm fully expecting CJ Stroud to lead them, not only into field goal range, but possibly do a touchdown, right? He's done it so many times already this season. Like how many rookie quarterbacks can you really say that about, that you're that scared of in that situation? And, they had a couple of key drops late in the game, a little bit of weird play calling. Like I think they got away from the run to an extreme degree. Like I know Jacksonville's a very good defense, but I still think you could pick up 1 yard on a 3rd and 1 against this defense. You don't need to be dropping back and sending 4 or 5 guys out on routes in those situations. And I think it became a little bit predictable at the end of the game for Jacksonville. But it led to another huge day through the air for Nico Collins, for Devin Singletary, for Tank Dell. All those guys went off. Tank Dell, very quietly, wide receiver 14 now on the year. Nico Collins is wide receiver 16. I don't think we thought in any world that the Texans would be producing 2 borderline top 15 fantasy receivers in PPR formats this year. And then, also mentioned the Jags pass catchers going off. I mean, it was to the point where Luke Farrell rumbled for like a 42-yard gain at one point. I mean, guys were just running all over the place on this Texans defense. You mentioned the ETN injury. He was banged up in the second quarter, came back, barely played in the fourth. It was like notably not on the field during some huge plays on the Jags' final 2 drives. So that is something to monitor. I don't think the expectation is he misses time, but if he does, I think you want to go get Dearness Johnson for a week. And Cam Robinson also left this game, the Jags' best offensive lineman. So that's something to monitor.
Absolutely. Alan Soslowski asked this of me when we were doing sneaky ads, but Tank Dell, Nico Collins, how early do they go next year?
Man, I almost feel like Tank.
Twos?
I mean, I think so, right? I mean, I think there's going to be a ton of hype around Tank Dell specifically, right? Especially if he keeps this up over the next few weeks. Just the youth kind of coming in with CJ Stroud, this narrative that CJ Stroud was like pushing the front office to draft this guy. I mean, he looks. I was reading a kind of a fantasy recap article this morning, and they referred to him as a potentially generational talent. And I was like, man, that seems strong for Tank Dell, but at the same time, man, I think you kind of have to throw the draft pedigree out the window at this point. Like if he was drafted in the first round, we'd be saying, yeah, he's doing what we expected. I mean, he's been as good as any receiver that went ahead of him, if not better.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the Chargers, which we'll refer to later, are getting what they're getting from Quentin Johnston. At least he didn't have a killer drop this week, so there is that. But yeah, it's got to be super frustrating there. And they had the head-to-head comparison, Johnston versus Zay Flowers, and and Tank Dell's another one of those. So too. Admiral Nita asks, is this the end for both Pierce and Singletary considering the schedule? Pierce, yeah. I mean, I have him in the stake league that's going to be buying stakes. But Singletary, I'm not, writing him off. He was catching plenty of passes yesterday, and there'll be other games. I understand this Denver game. I think they'll run the ball a little bit more.
Yeah, I still think you can run on Denver. I mean, the schedule is tough, though, right? If you're just looking at like rush defenses specifically, Denver, the Jets, the Titans, the Browns, the Titans again, and then the Colts in Week 18, which might not really matter for fantasy purposes. But yeah, I think Pierce, you could kind of cut bait on that dream if you haven't already. You probably already did a few weeks ago. But if you just look at the snaps, I mean, Devin Singletary played 49 snaps in this game. Dameon Pierce 11. So if there's one back to hold on to, it's clearly Singletary.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to the next headline game. And it's not a great game, but it had noteworthy things, and that's the Rams and Cardinals. Because of Kyren Williams. Man, he's a top 10 back again. I thought they'd ease him in a little bit.
So did I.
No, there was no easing in. He was single-handedly outgaining the Cardinals for a good stretch of this game. And I got to say, I was not just wrong, but aggressively wrong on this game. I thought Arizona was going to win this game. I was so unimpressed with the Rams offense, but getting Williams back changed everything.
I, did a cowardly hedge in my picks article where I was like, I wrote it on Tuesday this past week because of the holiday. And at that time, we had no idea if Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua were going to play. And I said, if one of those guys is out, the Cardinals are winning this game. If both of them are out, they're absolutely winning. It turned out they both played, and that was not the reason that the Rams, ran away with this one. I mean, this game was over early in the fourth quarter, and to me, it played out very similarly to most of Arizona's games this year, where they got off to a hot start. They drove right down the field after giving up a touchdown on the Rams' first drive. They go down, they get the 2-point conversion. I don't really know why. Just kind of we got nothing to lose. We're trying to send a message. It's 8-7 early on. And, they really didn't do anything in the first half after that. I mean, it's 3-and-out, 3-and-out, 4-and-out, another 3-and-out. And all of a sudden it's 21-8 by the end of the half. But Arizona, they come out strong. It feels like the scripted plays that Jonathan Gannon has ready at the beginning of these games tend to work. You get excited. You think we're getting a shootout. And then, this is now 3 weeks in a row where they've kind of wilted in the second half. But Kyren Williams is a story, man. I mean, 204 scrimmage yards, 2 touchdowns, 8.9 yards per carry on the ground. He had 120 yards in the first half alone. Arizona was just, they're not built to come from behind, right?
No.
I think they're a team that they want to get James Conner involved. They couldn't really do that. I thought both he and Michael Carter ran pretty well in this game. It just didn't matter. It was too little, too late. Royce Freeman got some garbage time work. He goes 13 for 77 and a touchdown for the Rams. But yeah, a game that they won almost completely on the ground, even with four passing touchdowns from Matthew Stafford. Like those were just kind of finishing off the drives.
Yep, indeed. And Stafford was like hyper efficient early on. He was having himself a day. Tyler Higbee got in the end zone, not once, but twice, both his first 2 touchdowns of the year. Notice that we're not mentioning the 2 receivers. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua combined for 35 yards on 7 catches. Kupp got banged up early in this one. I wouldn't be surprised if we see him questionable again heading into this upcoming week. That's going to be frustrating. But yeah, this was just, it was over. I mean, it just, even Zach Evans got on the field. They straight up waived Darrell Henderson. Then re-signed to the practice squad. But Williams is back and he's an auto start now the rest of the year.
I think he has to be. I'm still, as you probably are, skeptical of this Rams team. I still don't really love the personnel overall. I'd be very interested to see how they look against that Browns defense at home this coming week. I think that's going to be a fascinating game. After that, they're on the road at Baltimore. So still an uphill battle. They got to play San Francisco again later in the year. As far as trying to get one of those wild card spots in the NFC, I think that's still pretty unlikely. But considering all the attrition that they've had, I mean, Cooper Kupp, it feels like this is 3 weeks in a row where he's played but been banged up. I mean, it just feels like he's barely ever been at 100% since coming back. And obviously Nacua has cooled off quite a bit since the start of the year. But they just find ways. They find ways. I mean, I think they're back to at least being a team that will beat the bad teams and maybe split against teams that are about equal with them. But I don't have a whole lot of other notes from this game. On the Arizona side, Trey McBride, continues to be a very viable tight end starter every single week. 13 fantasy points for him. That counts as somewhat of a down game. He's got 2 20+ point fantasy games in PPR over the last 5. I think we got to view him as a pretty easily, top 10 tight end the rest of the way, maybe on the lower end of that.
Yeah. He's been in my top 10 regularly in the value meter. I don't see that changing, especially as others are kind of like drifting off. Like I saw Uncle Ted mention in the comments that Schoonmaker is hurting Ferguson, and that is true for Dallas. So that is one where it's getting watered down. And yeah, I see McBride being a top 10 guy the rest of the way. Greg Dortch had 9 targets with Michael Wilson out. I could see that continuing a little bit there. They drop at Pittsburgh next week, so we'll see what happens there. One other Arizona note: Kyler Murray had the rushing touchdown. Nick, that was his only run. And I think that was probably something that, and he got sacked 4 times, was pressured obviously plenty of times. So that might have something that might be part of the problem too.
Yeah, I mean, the offensive line is bad. We know that for Arizona, but still a little bit surprising that they're not getting him more involved in designed runs. I mean, we saw almost none of that. He scored on the same play that he did, I think it was 2 weeks ago, kind of that read option that he's as good as anybody at kind of making that last second decision. And he just walked into the end zone for their first touchdown in the first quarter. So, it could be something where, I think game script obviously played a part of it. When you're down 2 or 3 scores, you don't need Kyler Murray taking any hits. But something I think Arizona should consider getting in earlier in these game plans, because maybe part of it is just overall protection of Kyler Murray when you're a 2-10 team. I get that. But in a game like this, you're going to need that element from Kyler Murray when you're dealing with ultimately a pretty underwhelming group of pass catchers outside of Marquise Brown and Trey McBride.
Yeah, indeed. Let's move on to the marquee game of the week, at least over the weekend. And that was Philly Buffalo. Heck of a game. You had a lot of different elements there. Great play by Buffalo early, incredible comeback by the Eagles, despite a terrible 2-minute drill, awful officiating, weather was an issue, all sorts of stuff going on there.
Yeah, bad officiating all over the league this weekend. And this game, I think, was kind of the cherry on top. And we didn't mention in the Jags game, the interception that Trevor Lawrence threw was like one of the most obvious defensive holdings that you'll ever see, where Evan Ingram is getting his jersey tugged. And it was a great play by Lawrence. It's a play that you see, smart veteran quarterbacks make all the time, where you're throwing it specifically so the referee makes that call. And he stared right at him and didn't make it. And we had a couple of those situations in this game. I mean, Josh Allen, should have been a horse collar and then somehow turned into like an intentional grounding call.
Yes. All the same play. There was a whole lot of things going on there. I thought the Sunday night game might have been the worst ref game of them all. Chargers got hosed royally twice early on in that game. One was a huge changing play, but it's just really bad all around. But altogether, I mean, the Eagles found a way yet again, just like the Monday night game against the Chiefs. Also in the rain, they also found a way where they should have probably lost. Now, granted, Marquez Valdez-Scantling did a lot to do that there. The Bills, I mean, they just came up with huge drives all game long. This was the Bills offense that we wanted to see all year long. This was a fun offense to watch.
Yeah, I mean, Josh Allen threw his 8 games in a row now with an interception, so that's going to go on his ledger. But I thought he played a fantastic game. 29 of 51. You're not going to say that's like the greatest game he's ever put out there, but considering the conditions, when we say rain game, I mean it was raining hard this entire game, and I thought in that situation you would think Philly would be the team that would benefit, especially at home, and I thought Buffalo actually handled the elements better. It didn't really seem to affect Josh Allen whatsoever, and Gabe Davis I thought made some huge catches in this game. There's a miscommunication, on a big third down in overtime that basically could have won it if he and Allen had been on the same page. But for a guy who's struggled with drops, throughout his career, for this to be the game where he's bringing in tough catch after tough catch, I was pretty impressed there. Saw a good stat earlier today, Jeff, that the Buffalo Bills became the 4th team ever in NFL history to win the turnover battle, put up 500 plus yards of offense, outgain the opponent by at least 125 yards, and still lose, which is just kind of becoming a hallmark of this Bills season.
Yeah. And Jake Elliott, I mean, how can we not just sing his praises? I mean, holy crap, 60-yard field goal in that rain. Just when Bass was missing kicks, that wind was a problem all day. I mean, the conditions were awful. The Eagles, I mean, they ran the Seattle Seahawks game plan from a week ago in the 2-minute drill. Just hurt my brain seeing him call a running play there like that. And with 30 seconds left, burn their last time out. Then they had a false start, which, by the way, would have been another running play. And then they did the short throw, which would have been horrific too. It was just awful play calling.
Well, they had another false start too, right? I mean, there were two on Kelsey within like a 3-play span. So, I mean, obviously it didn't end up mattering. Jake Elliott bangs home a 59-yarder in the rain. I was wondering, it's like, are they going to fake this? This just seems like a little bit too long. I actually had that same thought in the Jags-Texans game as well. I thought it was a somewhat surprising decision by Houston to line up for that, and instead of just kind of trying to air it out with Stroud or try something crazy. But I mean, that should have been, probably a 49-yard field goal or even a 54-yard field goal if you don't have those 2 weird plays, very uncharacteristic of Jason Kelsey, just kind of flinching. And, it's something that as you're watching, you're like, does that really matter? But look, it was the right call. Both of them were the right call. Just strange play calling by the Eagles late. I think it was 2nd and 15, after the reversal on the AJ Brown, was it a fumble, was it not play? I actually like the call to run Hurts up the middle because it felt like they weren't really doing that a whole lot. And I didn't know if Buffalo would be prepared for it. Just was not well blocked whatsoever. And that put the Eagles up against the wall. And I mean, what did you think the chances were that he made that field goal? I was thinking, 10, 15%?
2, 3. I mean, it's Elliott. He's got a history of making great kicks, but my God, the conditions were horrible. Although it's so funny. The Eagles have Jalen Hurts. The Texans have CJ Stroud. But let's put the game in the hands of Elliott and Matt Amendola. Amendola, they kept on dutifully informing us. He's never kicked one before more than 49 yards. Even in high school, he's gone 51 or something like that. Yeah. And of course, they line him up for the 58-yarder, put the season on the line for that. At least Elliott has had the history of making some pretty clutch kicks. So a little different there, but still just wild game. Swift was kind of neutralized a little bit in this game. Just the some of the throws though, like just in that comeback, there, Hurts was throwing some dimes. I mean, That one to Zacchaeus was the only thing
Ooh.
Zacchaeus did all day, but oh my gosh, what a throw.
That reminded me of the final play in the Alabama-Auburn game too, just kind of finding him in the back of the end zone.
Yeah.
I mean, that was thrown to a spot where only Zacchaeus could get it. Pretty decent coverage, all things considered, by the Bills, and just a hell of a throw by Jalen Hurts. Devontae Smith had just huge catch after huge catch. Yep. A lot of those coming on second and longs, third downs late in the game. He was fantastic. Pretty quiet day overall for AJ Brown. Did have a touchdown in the second half to save a decent fantasy day, but he was not really a huge part of this game. You could say the same thing for Stephon Diggs. He put up more yards than AJ Brown, but it was more of a Gabe Davis show on the Buffalo side of things. You mentioned DeAndre Swift. Didn't really do a whole lot. I mean, had a huge run in overtime. Broke a couple of tackles, got to the outside, and ended up setting up. I think they scored on the next play on the Jalen Hurts run, which a couple of Eagles in the post game said, we couldn't believe Buffalo gave us that look on defense. He said they knew when they broke the huddle and they saw how Buffalo was lining up. They're like, we knew we were going to score because that play is automatic when we see that look. So the Eagles had kind of been sitting on that, I think, for the entire game. Just an escape, another escape by the Eagles. I think to compare it to last week against Kansas City is very accurate. I mean, the Bills ran 92 plays. They ran 27 more plays than Philly in this game. You still lose. Buffalo 13 of 22 on third downs. It felt like for a while there, they were converting every 3rd and 6. A lot of nice plays by Josh Allen in those situations. But man, the Bills sitting at 6-6 now. You got to go to Kansas City next week. You got the Cowboys, the Chargers, the Pats, and the Dolphins remaining on that schedule. I still think Buffalo makes the playoffs somehow. I don't know how they're going to do it, but I still think they get in. And my nightmare scenario is that they're the 7th seed and they have to play the Jags in the first round.
Yeah, that would be awful. That would really be horrible.
I personally, I'll say it. I'd rather play the Colts or the Broncos.
Yeah, of course you would. Although the Broncos, we'll get to them, but they're ascendant at least. They're very interesting. I think the Colts. I mean, you obviously know how to beat the Colts. There's no doubt about that one there. The Eagles have the best record in football, but they don't have the best Super Bowl odds, even in the NFC. If you go to RotoWire's odds page, you see that San Francisco has better odds. Yep. They play each other next week, of course. Speaking of that Super Bowl, one of our sponsors is Circa. Get ready for the ultimate big game parties at Circa Resort and Casino. Super Sunday is in Las Vegas this year. Watch the big game poolside at Stadium Swim's big game viewing party. Massive screen, booming game sound, and a view of the pyrotechnic and visual effects throughout the game. Snag the best seat in the sun with day beds, poolside boxes, cabanas, and more. Or touchdown at the world's largest sportsbook, Circa Sports, the Big Game Bash. 3 stories of football glory featuring a 78 million pixel screen. Book your seat with a variety of reservation options, including bottle service, open bar, stadium-style food, and more. Don't miss these legendary viewing experiences on February 11th. The big game parties, only at Circa Resort and Casino. Reserve today at circalasvegas.com. All right, Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. We've gone 28 minutes on 3 games. Let's accelerate this pace just ever so slightly, but we did hit the 3 biggest games. Indy Tampa Bay turned out to have some heft. It didn't quite go to Carnival shootout mode, but it was an offensive game and not offensive like the other 4 early games. This one actually had some fun offense. The Colts, I actually think they're kind of good. They're 6-5 now. They're currently a wild card team.
They're an extremely fun team to watch, and I did not see that coming whatsoever. Obviously, Gardner Minshew, brings an entertaining element wherever he goes, but normally it's like bad entertaining in terms of the final result. But he continues to pick up steam. I mean, threw a pick in this one, should have had another. It was a great play by the receiver to end up jarring that loose. So he's still good for like 2 or 3 Jameis throws per game, where you're just wondering, what the hell is going on here. But this was a game that Indy was able to win on the ground, and I didn't see that coming. When we were previewing this on the show last week, I thought Vita Vea and that Bucs defensive line would kind of force Gardner Minshew to beat them. And Minshew did throw the ball 41 times, which is probably more than you want if you're the Colts. But Jonathan Taylor, 15 for 91 and 2 touchdowns. Zach Moss got his 8 for 55, over 150 rushing yards for the Colts. That's significantly more than I expected. Tampa Bay even ran the ball okay, 100-yard day for Rachaad White, which, happens once in a blue moon at this point. But yeah, the Colts are kind of back to, where they were before that, disaster of a New England game, which they won. But that was the only game this year where they have not scored at least 20 points. So they got back on that track. Baker Mayfield, pretty gutty performance. The numbers weren't great. Did throw a bad pick and accounted for one of their 2 turnovers on the lost fumble as well. But I thought he was going to go out of this game, early on. It looked like he had suffered, a somewhat major injury. We saw a couple snaps of Kyle Trask, excuse me, and then Baker was able to come back in and make this a game in the second half. Another nice day for Mike Evans, who now is up to wide receiver 8 on the year. He goes 6 for 70 and 2 touchdowns. But I think you're right. I think the Colts absolutely have a shot to sneak into the playoffs. I think the AFC South could somehow have 3 playoff teams, which nobody expected. And obviously the attrition, for a team like Cincinnati and the Bills, being below their level is part of the reason for that. But yeah, the Colts are very well coached, and it's an offense that, despite a relative lack of playmakers, it was a good day for Michael Pittman, but he hasn't had a ton of those this year. It seems like they've really found somebody in Josh Downs. He goes 5 for 43 despite being banged up. They're a team that could kind of hang in with anybody.
Yeah, they hit the road for 3 of their next 4 games: at Tennessee, at Cincy, home against the Steelers, at Atlanta, home against the Raiders, home against the Texans to finish. So not a terrible schedule either there. So viable, at least. They won't be huge underdogs, and even they might be underdogs, but it'll be within the margin of error. So we'll see about that one there. But interesting to me, Jonathan Taylor didn't catch any passes, didn't even get targeted. Rachaad White, only 2 targets in the passing game, despite the 100-yard rushing. And we usually expect to see his production in the air, but that didn't quite happen. Baker Mayfield, you mentioned, got banged up. He had an MRI on his ankle today, came back negative. He is listed as questionable, but there's, because they're in the NFC South, which is the NFC but South, they're still alive. Atlanta, New Orleans, whatever. They're not going to run away. They host Carolina this week, a good chance to get well. So they're not dead yet.
Oh, not even close. Not even close. I mean, they're only a game back of Atlanta and New Orleans. I mean, the Saints looked horrific yesterday. We'll get to that game in a moment. I mean, Tampa Bay has somehow lost, 6 of their last 7, and they're very much in this. They should get a win against Carolina at home. I think they're 5 or 6 point favorites in that one. They're at Atlanta in a game that could go a long way toward deciding the division. They do get Carolina twice, over these last 6 games, which is massive. And really that, they play Jacksonville on Christmas Eve. That's one that as of right now, is probably looking like a loss. But I think the rest of those are very, very winnable for this Bucs team, which I don't know how they keep doing it. Like they're not really a fun watch. They'll put together 1 or 2 really impressive drives per game where you kind of see some of the potential beneath the surface with this team. But overall, still just a bit of a talent drain, I think, over the last couple of years, thinking back to just that Super Bowl team with Tom Brady. And we should mention, I mean, they were extremely banged up on the defensive side. I actually thought the Colts could have put up more points in this one. I mean, you're down 2 corners, you're down Levante David. All things considered, I think the Bucs actually played okay, especially with the banged up Baker.
Yeah, I mean, what did you expect them to do this year? That's the thing, and they're playing hard. There's plenty of derpy teams in the NFL. This is definitely a high-end derpy team, if not derpy at all. And they're entertaining enough. They have some games that end up being shots. Like Houston game was really fun, obviously. We'll watch Baker's status though. We did see Kyle Trask make 1 throw, which was just let a guy too far after Pat.
Yeah, it was actually not a bad throw.
Yeah, just to let him just a little. If he gets rid of it just like a nanosecond earlier, he can get 2 feet down, but it wasn't terrible. Let's stick in the South. Let's stick in that Atlanta New Orleans game. Speaking of okay, so I would rather watch Tampa than Atlanta any day. Even though Atlanta is a better team, but barely. I still think they're a fraud. I think the Saints are frauds too. Boy, I'm really selling these teams, but it's not my job to sell. It's my job to recap here. They won, I guess, and New Orleans, it's just they settled for field goals all day long. Derek Carr somehow threw for 300 yards. They didn't score a touchdown. It was a weird game.
What else do you expect, right? In my pickup league that I reference all the time, confidence points, this was the most obvious 1-pointer I've had all year. And I think I'm now 0 for 21 trying to pick either of these teams any given week. And we're not even talking spreads. We're just talking straight up winners. Every time I think, all right, this is the spot for New Orleans to win. They have a game like this. And the same goes for Atlanta. I mean, really what it came down to was it wasn't Atlanta necessarily outplaying the Saints, who got all their points on 5 Blake Groupie field goals. It was New Orleans going 0-5 in the red zone with a pick 6 and a devastating Taysom Hill fumble at about the 10-yard line. I mean, those were 2 drives where I guess at the very least, you're tacking on 2 more Blake Grupe field goals. But the Carr pick was unconscionable. I mean, it was just it didn't even look. Jesse Bates, came over for a pretty easy interception, untouched the rest of the way. Even if Jesse Bates isn't there and there's one-on-one coverage, I still think that might have been picked by the.
I was just going to say that.
It was just, I don't know what he was looking at. I mean, at the very least, that's knocked out, no question. And it might have been picked. So it was just, you get 1 or 2 of those Carr plays every single week. And that was among his worst throws of the entire year. And then Taysom Hill, it's like we talk about him all the time, kind of rumbling through, and he has this unique ability to just kind of truck anybody depending on or regardless of their size. And it was a nice hard run by Taysom Hill, who made some plays in this game, but uncharacteristic, of him to put the ball on the ground in that spot. So I think New Orleans left at least 10, if not 14 points on the board there. Desmond Ridder was not great in this game. He had 2 picks of his own, 13 of 21. Did make a really nice, kind of back foot throw, lobbing it over the defense to Bijan Robinson for a touchdown. Chris Olave had a huge first half, got banged up early in the second half, left with a concussion. So we kind of had a skeleton crew of pass catchers for most of this game for New Orleans with no Michael Thomas. I was all fired up. Like I got A.T. Perry going in all my DFS lineups. He played 53 snaps and had only 2 targets.
Yeah, and with everybody out, Rashid Shaheed got hurt with a quad injury. Juwan Johnson got banged up in this game. You mentioned Thomas is out for maybe the year, definitely on IR right now. And who knows what's going on with Thomas? There was, that arrest happened and kind of just got brushed under the rug because then he got hurt right after that. And anyhow, but they're a strange team, very strange team.
Yeah, I mean, it was to the point where Lynn Bowden was involved in the offense. I actually made a couple of nice plays on the ground. You may remember him as the former Kentucky quarterback. I think he was drafted by the Raiders and was traded before ever even playing in a game.
Didn't make it to week 1 with the Raiders.
Yeah. But kind of a gadgety, unique type of player. I mean, has some Taysom Hill in him, so you can see why the Saints might be attracted to that. But still not really somebody we need to.
we need one more gadget guy. Yes.
Yeah. I don't have a whole lot else to say here. I mean, I will note we got the split. I think that we want maybe not quite as strongly in favor of Bijan as you prefer, but 39 snaps for Robinson, 18 for Algier, and then we actually saw a fair amount of Cordero Patterson, who played 16 snaps.
Yeah, and in this instance, they all ran well, so it's hard to really complain too much when it's working, right? They ran for 228 yards.
Yeah, this is the Falcons model, right? Hold to field goals and just run the ball and run clock.
Hope that Ridder can't hurt you that much. He threw 2 picks, didn't take any sacks at least. But yeah, QB rating's not great. Still better than Carr's, but it's just Carr somehow had a terrible 300-yard game. It's just and granted, I'll grade on the curve because he lost Olave for the full second half, but Olave looked so unlocked. That's the thing that's so frustrating. Anyways, we'll move on to the Carolina-Tennessee game. Note, I'm avoiding one particular game here. I will get to it eventually, but let's stick in the NFC South. Hey, Carolina fired their coach today. Frank Reich had no chance. None chance. Was forced to draft Bryce Young. You mentioned this. Houston said they would have taken him anyhow, but or maybe Allen mentioned that. I always forget who mentioned that previously, but Houston did say they would have taken Young over Stroud too, for what it's worth. But David Tepper is a meddlesome owner, and he's graduating beyond his Jerry Jones starter kit at this point in time. It's Carolina just looks. What's the point of Carolina? I guess it's just so other teams can. It exists so other teams can play games.
I was watching Auburn, Alabama on Saturday, and they kind of ran some past highlights of those teams matching up, and obviously Bryce Young had been a part of a couple of those games, and some of the throws that he was making at Alabama, you're just like, where is this? Like, this is a completely different guy than we're seeing in the NFL, and I'm still not out on Bryce Young. I think he's just in an underratedly disastrous situation. I think the way that Trevor Lawrence and everything devolved with Urban Meyer a few years ago, it was obvious early on that it was dysfunctional. I think with Carolina, it kind of took us a while to realize, like, man, this is a really, really bad situation. And I think it starts with the owner. Like, I'm not surprised whatsoever that Frank Reich is out midway through the season. It's like, what is the point of this at this point? Like, there's nothing to salvage right now. You don't even have your own first round pick. Like, I don't really see the point of firing someone, especially like someone like Frank Reich, who ultimately is like pretty steady as far as presences go. I don't think he's a guy that was like, hated in the locker room in the way that Josh McDaniels was with the Raiders, where it just felt like something had to give there. There's a great tweet from a Panthers beat writer after the game that said, David Tepper like charged his way into the locker room, walked out, and then just screamed the F word in front of a bunch of reporters. So once I saw that, I thought maybe the
he gone.
For Frank Reich. I mean, what was it, 4 or 5 weeks ago? Frank Reich had that bizarre press conference where he just looked like a sad puppy. He was like, after every loss, I have to go meet with the owner, and I'm going to be honest, it wasn't fun. It hasn't been a fun season. So I think in some ways he's probably relieved. I mean, this was just a bad fit. I don't know who's going to want to go and coach this team. It's like, I think there are still plenty of people out there who think they can salvage Bryce Young. And I would be of that belief as well. I don't really think he's the core issue here, but I mean, you have an owner now that we have to kind of put in like the Jim Irsay category of just, you don't know what's going to happen. And ultimately Jim Irsay loves his team so much and always wants the best for his team as much of a weirdo as he is. Whereas it feels like Tepper's meddling is like a little bit more, it's a little bit more impactful as far as like the product on the field. I mean, this is a team that, especially not having your first round pick, man. I mean, they're like, how do they get better?
Yeah, it's bad. It's going to be a long overhaul now for this team. There was a brief phase in my life where I used to watch pro wrestling. I misouted myself on that, but the concept of a jobber, that's what Carolina is right now. They are there to do the job and put somebody else over. And that's what they did. Okay, let's talk about Tennessee real quick, because they're kind of just what's their point of a franchise too right now. They won at home. That's what they do, but they didn't look especially good. Derrick Henry scored, but wasn't efficient. Will Levis, was better, not great. There's not a whole lot to say, as we go on, we're getting to worse and worse offensive performances here. There's a bottom below this, by the way. But Derrick Henry got his, and not much else. I mean, Hopkins 3 for 49, Chig 4 for 45. I mean, that's good for Chig. I mean, Spears got banged up pretty bad in this game. We'll check his status, but it doesn't really matter. You can't start him anyhow. And that's the thing is, with 6 teams on bye next week, you're going to have to be looking at some of these guys. You're like, I can't do it. Baltimore, Buffalo, Chicago, Vegas, Minnesota, and the Giants all off next week. Mm-hmm. We might have to make a hard choice. Do I start Tajay Spears or somebody else this week?
Yeah. And luckily it's, the last week where you hopefully have to dig that deep. And I don't know if Tennessee is necessarily the team that I'm mining for a ton of value, but at least with Chig, there's probably still some believers out there, and they have a good matchup against the Colts. I don't know that the Titans are necessarily capable of playing what we would define as a shootout, but they're going to have to keep up, because I think Indy's going to put points up in that game. And, they're at Miami after that. That's another one where you might be in some trail situations and want to look at some Tennessee pass catchers. This was the game that I had by far the fewest notes on of the entire Sunday slate. I mean, Derrick Henry looked great in the first half, 2 touchdowns. You're thinking, all right, maybe this is one of those huge signature Henry games, but Tennessee did nothing in the second half. I mean, this was a game that they dominated despite, leading by 1 score for basically the whole second half, but they punted on every single drive in the third and fourth quarter until they got the ball back and just kneeled it out after Carolina went out on downs. I mean, it was a game that they won defensively. Jeffrey Simmons was all over the place. Kind of another reminder game that despite Tennessee just being this kind of malaise of a franchise, like, he is still one of the best defensive players in the entire league, not even just at his position. I mean, he is a complete game wrecker. But other than that, not a whole lot to say. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins was the Titans' leading receiver, but curiously only played 30 snaps. I wasn't watching this one closely enough to see if he was banged up at all or if they were just being a little bit conservative with him, but played fewer snaps than Westbrook-Akina and Chris Moore.
Yeah. Titan fever, catch it.
4-7, baby.
Yeah. Panic meter and Adam Thielen. I mean, I had to scroll. 1 catch on 3 targets. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty high. I mean, with the coaching change, who knows? Jonathan Mingo, I just mentioned in Sneaky Ads in the previous video they did. I mean, he's getting the snaps and targets every week. It seems like there's a pretty decent floor, and he is part of the future. Thielen, I mean, since like the trade deadline, he's done basically nothing. I mean, I haven't downgraded him enough in my value meter rankings. I will do so this upcoming week because it's pretty high. I think Thielen's had 1 good game in that stretch.
I actually thought this might be a good spot for him because I didn't think Carolina would be able to run the ball, and they weren't really able to, but they continued to do it despite getting basically nothing on the ground. I mean, Miles Sanders was like under 2 yards per carry. He still carried the ball 15 times. I thought this could just be, one of those rare games where Bryce Young is letting it fly because he got nothing else to really fall back on offensively. So I, now regrettably told somebody on Twitter, like, yeah, start Adam Thielen. I think this could be a good spot. Did not think he would play basically every snap and only be targeted 3 times. But that's the story of the Panthers offense, man. I mean, even in these obvious situations where you're down multiple scores, as they are in basically every game, it's 3rd and 11 after Bryce Young takes a sack. And, you're just like, all right, well, we'll just throw a 4-yard check down and get out of here and punt. Like, there's just no, I'd like to see some more risk taking, even if that results in some negative plays for Bryce Young. Like, what do you have to lose at this point?
Agreed. Absolutely agree. I also agree that the Blue Wire Network is a good place to host our podcast. Here are their ads. All right, folks. Bengals, Steelers, nothing happened. All right, let's talk Giants and and Patriots now. Okay, so Pittsburgh, they not only did they outgain the Bengals, they broke their 400-yard streak, lack of 400-yard game streak in the very first game that Matt Canada wasn't the offensive coordinator. This game was 16-10, but it wasn't that close. Once they got to 16-7, it was all over. Actually, when it was 13-7, I felt like it was all over. Bengals did get a late drive to get a field goal. Bengals were leading 7-3 at halftime and driving to start the second half. And then Jake Browning throws a terrible interception in the red zone. And that was it. The Bengals showed no life after that.
Not really. I thought Pittsburgh, you kind of knew what the plan was going to be going in, and that was make Jake Browning prove that he's as confident as he says he is and that he can beat us. And I thought early on, Browning looked pretty good. I mean, Cincinnati had a couple bounces go their way. They're like 2 deflected passes that turned into pretty big plays. One of them was a big one to
both of them Chase. Both of them were to Chase.
Yeah. And, I think some of that luck, not that it resulted in a ton for Cincinnati, but some of that started to dry up in the second half. I mean, it got to the point where Pittsburgh just knew Cincinnati could not run the ball. I mean, Joe Mixon 8 for 16 with a long of 4 yesterday. And I think, they're just like, all right, we're going to tee off and just, keep sending heat at Jake Browning. And he only took 4 sacks. I thought he actually moved around pretty well, but was under consistent siege. And you just felt like if it was, 3rd and 6 or longer, they had almost no chance to convert. You mentioned, the Steelers outgained their opponent for the first time this season, did it by almost 200 yards. This was the Steelers' first game with 400 yards of offense in their last 58 games, which is a streak that I did not know was ongoing, but makes a lot of sense when you think back to how the Steelers have played these last couple of years. Despite only putting up 16 points, still a lot of improvement, I thought, overall from this offense. You put up 150 yards between Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren on the ground. Kenny Pickett got to 278 yards, should have had a touchdown if Deontay Johnson just kind of hangs onto the ball in the end zone. That was, a weird play that a couple plays later, they ended up fumbling and losing out on a scoring opportunity. So I actually was pretty encouraged by the first game of the post-Matt Canada era. Thought the Steelers took more shots downfield, hit a couple, missed on a few more. But the other side of this too, Jeff, is I think the Bengals know their season is over, and it's hard to quantify what that means. But we've seen some pretty serious slippage from this defense, even well before the Steelers game.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pretty bad defense this year. By the way, the fumble happened immediately after the non-touchdown. As the broadcasters on the game suggested, that play should have been reviewed. It should have been a touchdown. It was clear what is a catch.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you saw the thing going around Twitter about Deontay Johnson's lack of interest in the very next play, where he didn't block on the run play. He didn't go after the fumble when Warren put it on the ground. He didn't try to tackle the recovering player. It was a weird sequence there. It should have been a catch, I think, but that was one of the reasons why the Bengals were ahead at halftime. And, the Steelers kind of stalled out at weird times. The Steelers ran 68 plays, the Bengals 41. This game was over like 20 minutes before every other game on the early slate. It's just because Pittsburgh was grinding it out on the ground. Bengals had all sorts of fumble luck. They got the Warren fumble, which was very late in the play. It was really a fumble. It was reviewed, obviously, because all turnovers are reviewed, and it stood. But it bounced right up into a Bengals hands. The TJ Watt smashed Browning one time, caused a fumble, and it went right to the offensive lineman, who actually it went to him so well that he picked it up and ran a couple of yards. Jonah Williams did. Bengals had fumble luck in this game. They had their deflection luck that you alluded to. I'm not even being self-hating. The Bengals were clearly inferior in this game, and it should have been worse than it was. And how can it not be too? I mean, the Bengals are in our season is over mode right now. There's no other way. I feel that way, at least, and I can imagine certain players do too. Yeah, and of course, Pittsburgh comes to town that next week and gets to benefit from that. I think they might recover eventually. You know, Brownie gets more reps. He made some good throws. But yeah, it's a pretty painful watch. Yeah, that's all I got to say about that. There wasn't a whole lot more. George Pickens had the wind knocked out of him at one point in time, and then immediately right after he came back, he made a big play that set up a late score for Pittsburgh too. And Najee Harris looked better than Warren, obviously, this week, because this is the week everybody said Warren's going to go off, and so of course it was Harris that went off. Also, sorry, one more thing. I did have one other thing. The Najee Harris touchdown, actually, there was a hold on that play. They threw the flag, and then they said there was no holding.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very weird sequence, picking up the flag like that, and it looked like a hold too.
Oh, big time. Zach Taylor was irate, as he should have been.
Yeah, it was like, what are we? Some teams get the calls, and some teams are the Bengals. I will just say that. The game I have the least notes for is New England and the Giants.
Goodness.
This was a travesty of a game. The Giants lose by winning. The Patriots win by losing, I feel like, in this one here, just in the get a better draft pick sweepstakes. Not that players should tank or coaches should tank, but yeah, there was nothing to be gained here. And thank God there wasn't overtime in this game. They missed the kick. That was just for fans' sake, for TV's sake, all sake. Just a bad game.
This was as ugly as it possibly could have been. And I know there's a lot of momentum on the Pats side of things in the betting world. In the Circa contest, that was a really popular pick. Everybody thought the Patriots were, I think kind of just riding that, Bill Belichick against an inexperienced bad quarterback narrative, which, to be fair, had basically been undefeated. This was the first time an undrafted quarterback has beaten Bill Belichick in his entire career, right? So like there's plenty of reasons to think that the Patriots, as bad as they've been, would be able to show up in this spot. But I mean, I thought the play calling was bizarre. Obviously, the interceptions for Mac, he was responsible for 2, and then one bad one by Zappi that set up what ended up being the game-winning field goal by the Giants. Like, those were the primary reasons the Patriots lost this game. But I thought they should have ran the ball more than they did, and they ran it 30 times. Between Zeke and Ramondre Stevenson, I thought they were doing enough. Both guys were hovering around 5 yards per carry. I don't know why they felt that Jones and Zappi had to throw the ball as much as they did. And, obviously you expect to make a 34-yard field goal at the end of the game to force overtime. And who knows what happens from there. Maybe the Patriots pull it out. But I thought they were very conservative, getting the ball back with about 3 minutes left. And I understand you got Bailey Zappi in at quarterback. You can't take too many chances. But even on 3rd and 8 with about 30 seconds left, and you had 2 timeouts at that point. They ran this like half-hearted reverse to Tyquan Thornton that just had no chance of possibly getting a first down. I'm like, you gotta try something at this point to try to just end this and not even take your chances in overtime, because the way this was going, it's not like you felt like it got to overtime and like, all right, the Patriots are going to take over. I mean, that was going to be 50-50 no matter what. If anything, we were probably heading towards a 10-10 tie, honestly, if that thing got to overtime. But yeah, I thought the Patriots were ultra conservative and perhaps rightfully so with how bad both of the quarterbacks were. I mean, this really felt like maybe the end for Mac Jones. Like, I don't think, if he parts ways with the Patriots, I don't think he's like out of the league forever, but I think he's mentally broken right now. I don't really think there's any other way to put it. I mean, we saw that bad pick a couple of weeks ago, near the red zone against the Colts. This was the one that he threw, the second pick of the game that almost was returned for a pick 6, by the way, by Isaiah Simmons. I mean, it was the worst pick that anybody's thrown all year. I really think it was. And it's just like, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm like a Mac Jones believer, but this is not the guy that he was a couple of years ago, or even at times last season. Like, something is very, very wrong behind the scenes. And the Patriots, even when they're playing well, they've always been a team that doesn't look like they're having fun. I mean, this entire team just looks miserable.
Yeah, another Bama quarterback finding out life is hard when you're not with Bama and against lesser opponents there, I guess. To me, this is the play stupid games, win stupid prizes game, because the Pats were doing this whole, everybody should be prepared to play. We'll give Will Grier some first team reps and then we'll cut him on Friday. Okay, you get what you deserve here. You can't commit to a quarterback. You go half and half. It's just like, So dumb. 35 passing attempts, 136 passing yards. Come on. That includes the sacks, but it was bad. Meanwhile, Tommy DeVito, he doesn't turn the ball over as far as like throwing interceptions. Did put the ball on the ground twice, lost one of them, got sacked 6 times, but he's been cromulent. He's been okay. And he unlocked Jalen Hyatt. I thought that was the big takeaway for me is, oh, hey, they've got this early draft pick wide receiver that's looked good earlier. Maybe we should throw it to him more often. All it took was, injuries to others so he would get the attempts, but Hyatt's good. They need to use him more.
I think so too. Yeah. And I mean, they're so banged up that I think they almost had to by default in this game. And we saw, why he was a mid-round pick, a guy who was a great player at Tennessee at the college level. Had one long one from DeVito. Other than that, just kind of, nickel and dimed his way to 109 yards. We saw Isaiah Hodgins pull in the lone touchdown of the game for the New York Giants. I mean, almost nothing from Saquon Barkley. If you could say one good thing about the Pats, it's that they did keep him, bottled up. 12 for 46 on the ground, just one catch for 6 yards. But I mean, they even sacked Tommy DeVito 6 times, right? I mean, that's like he was sacked 9 times last week, so he's 2-0 in his last 2, despite taking 15 total sacks over that span. You can't say enough bad things about this New England offense, though, man. I mean, the interceptions were the reason that they lost this game, but neither Mack nor Zappi completed a pass that traveled more than 8 yards in the air. I mean, that's what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, it was reminiscent of like Bears in week 1 with the lack of air yards. And Jamario Douglas getting hurt didn't help either.
Right.
He had a hand injury in this one. Had 9 targets before that happened too. So yeah, Stevenson was like the only real positive. Zeke Elliott actually had some good runs too, I guess. But yeah, it's just not pretty all around there. Let's move on. But before we do that, quick note from our friends at Splash Sports. RotoWire is proud to partner with Splash Sports for the 2023 fantasy football season. Splash empowers gaming commissioners to earn by creating contests. Commissioners can set up contests, add their style, and enjoy the evolving Splash Sports platform for customized preferences. From daily to season-long contests, Splash Sports caters to various playing styles, such as DFS, Pick X, and traditional Survivor. And unlike traditional sportsbooks, Splash Sports pits you against friends and family, not the house. Splash goes beyond betting, a space where friends can connect, strategize, and share in the excitement of sports. RotoWire will be running weekly DFS tiers contests on Splash Sports all season. Can you beat the RotoWire experts? Visit rotowire.com/splash to enter today. All right, let's hit the nightcap. This was actually, it was an entertaining game, but ultimately kind of disappointing to me. I kind of expected more offense out of this one, but both defenses, I didn't feel like it was a lack of execution by the offenses. I felt like it was really good defenses by both teams just stepping up for the most part there, which surprised me with the Chargers that they played as well as they did. I mean, they were helped out by Baltimore not challenging a spot and then running a direct snap to Gus Edwards on a 4th down. Very galaxy brainish thing. Refs were bad in this game. What was your take on this game?
Shockingly decent game by the Chargers offense. I think you said it. They ended up allowing, over 350 yards, but Baltimore picked up some of those late in the game and had a long touchdown at the end to ultimately put this one away. But I mean, this was a Chargers defense that a couple weeks ago allowed 533 yards to the Lions, 400 yards to the Green Bay Packers. I mean, I thought this could be, a complete bloodbath and perhaps the death knell for Brandon Staley. But I thought the Chargers defense came to play. LA missed a pretty big opportunity, I thought, to put a touchdown on the board on the first drive of the game. I think Baltimore holding it to a field goal at that point was pretty huge. But the Ravens just looked a little disjointed. I think they obviously missed Mark Andrews, who is just such a safety blanket for Lamar Jackson. I mean, even in his post-game interview, Lamar, got the game ball, and he's like, this should go to the defense, man. Like, we did not play well on offense. I don't think Baltimore felt good about how this game turned out. But yeah, the Chargers defense showed up. Ravens defense showed up certainly in the second half. Had some big plays on Justin Herbert, forced an interception, forced a few fumbles as well, 2 in a row now for Austin Eckler losing a big one. You mentioned Quentin Johnston earlier in the pod. Didn't have any game-losing drops necessarily, but still didn't look good. Got banged up, barely played in the second half. And Brandon Staley was a little bit cryptic about that. He said it was a coach's decision. So I think the he got hit in the ribs. So kind of the midsection injury combined with the fact that he's just wildly ineffective meant that we saw a lot of Alex Erickson with the game on the line. Keenan Allen got his 14 for 106, but he lost a big fumble as well.
Yeah.
You take away the 3 lost fumbles, Allen, Eckler, and Herbert. I mean, your 3 best players putting the ball on the ground. And this is a winnable game for the Chargers. I think if you told them, hey, you're at home and you hold Baltimore to 20 points, you feel okay about your chances to get to 21 or 23. But this kind of felt like the official, all right, the season's probably over. We need to reevaluate game for the Chargers, who are now 2-5 in their last 7.
Absolutely. And again, they should have been a 3-point loss again, and which meant I would have gotten a cover, but instead Flowers scored on that last third down play. So many different things that could happen. But then again, I didn't deserve the cover because Justin Tucker missed a field goal that would have taken it to 6 anyhow. And the Chargers weren't scoring. The one point on the broadcast, the Ravens are allowing like 4 yards per pass, which is just crazy. Just crazy how low that is, how low likelihood of success is. Keenan Allen got his 106 yards, but it took 16 targets to get there. And because there's just nobody else that's a real threat. Eckler has not, he's lost a step. And I think, he came back from that ankle injury. He came back a different player. I just don't think he's the same player right now. I think he's a half step slow. You mentioned that not scoring on the first touchdown on the first drive. That's because Herbert got blasted 2 steps out of bounds. No call there. Everett comes in to protect his player, gets to 15 yards. It was such a travesty. It's like, I can't tell you how bad an officiating job that is. You see this sometimes in basketball where the ref screws up, misses a call, and then compounds the problem by giving a tech to the other side. Yeah. You see that sometimes, and you see it in football too, but it's just, it's doubly wrong. You see it in every sport. And it's just so bad. And then there was the interference with the punt return, whatever. That wasn't a game changer. That not getting 3 instead of 7 on that is such a huge difference in that game.
Yeah, you said it. I mean, it was a bizarre non-call. I mean, you see that called, I don't know, 95 out of 100 times when a quarterback takes a hit, especially, a non-running quarterback. Sometimes like, Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts, they don't get that call because they just, I think refs kind of think of them more as runners, but a quarterback like Herbert gets that almost every time. And then, to compound it with the 15-yard flag there was pretty brutal. And that essentially ended any chance of a touchdown for the Chargers. But they had opportunity after opportunity in the second half. You mentioned that the huge missed field goal by Justin Tucker. I mean, that one felt like a gimme. Chargers went out on downs each of the next 2 drives, and it was almost entirely due to pressure from the Baltimore defensive line. They only had 3 sacks on the day, but Herbert was constantly under siege. That's been a hallmark of this Chargers offense over the last couple games. And I thought Baltimore played a really good game defensively. I mean, I think they have the best linebacker tandem in the NFL right now in Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen. They both had some huge plays. I mean, even Jadeveon Clowney. Jadeveon Clowney got into the mix. I mean, he forced that really was the play of the game, I thought, forcing that strip sack on Herbert, because that came at the end of a 19-play, 9-minute drive for the Chargers. I mean, that's part of the reason that Baltimore only has 20 points is because they barely possessed the ball in the second half when the Chargers, ate up almost the whole third quarter on one drive. And you come away with no points, not a single point, right? Even getting a field goal there would have been big. But that came on a 3rd and long, Clowney getting in there, sacking Herbert, and then recovering the fumble himself as well. So not a whole lot to say on the Baltimore side. I think they're still ironing some things out. A lot of people were on Odell Beckham this week, in DFS, things like that. Did not have a huge week. Really didn't play that many snaps as well. We saw a lot more Rashad Bateman. He played 57 snaps. That was second behind Zay Flowers. Vastly outsnapped Odell Beckham and Nelson Aguilar. So we've seen this receiving core kind of, ebb and flow week to week. And I don't know if they just didn't like the matchup for Beckham or if he was banged up or what. But
he was banged up. He got hurt at the end of that Bengals game. He hurt his shoulder. There was something at the very beginning of the broadcast saying he wasn't 100%. So that's probably why. They do that though. I mean, your point still stands. But OBJ was definitely banged up in this one. Plus now they have the bye. They have this nice long stretch here with that. And they had a little stretch where they didn't have to play after the Thursday night game too. They couldn't come at a better time for Baltimore. Now they sit back and watch everybody else tear each other apart for a week.
Yeah, Baltimore's in a good spot, man. Even without Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, he was their leading receiver last night. 4 catches for 40. He's still somebody I have a lot of interest in, especially in shallower leagues. If he's out there, go grab him. I think there's going to be 1 or 2 boom weeks the rest of the way. And then the last thing I'll say on this game before we hit the afternoon slate, Keaton Mitchell, didn't put up huge numbers necessarily. Did go 9 for 64, 2 for 25 through the air. but vastly outsnapped Justice Hill and Gus Edwards, 33 snaps for Keaton Mitchell. So we're moving in the right direction on that front.
Yeah, and he had a couple of big splash plays. I mean,
Yep.
that's the thing. Even though he didn't like have a monster over all day, he had plays that changed the field and got them in a lot of better position there. So yeah, I think that was pretty important. All right, we got 2 games left. All right, let's do KC Vegas. This one was like 2 different games. Vegas jumped on the Chiefs early. Big drive right away. They were up 14-0 on this one. And then after that, she said, okay, let's reset. And they were fine. And in fact, this is the best the Chiefs offense has looked in a while. It wasn't perfect. The receivers are still meh, but Rashee Rice looks good. Isaiah Pacheco got his. He was a good little DFS play this week. Chiefs actually scored in the second half. Go figure that, the Chiefs, we're talking about the Chiefs having a second half scoring drought. Who knew? But the Vegas is playing hard for Antonio Pierce. I'll give them credit. The Raiders, I've said it before, they're a real franchise now, not just a joke of a team. They're no longer a derpy team. They're a team.
Yeah, I thought, despite allowing 31 points, it was still, a pretty decent game overall for the Raiders, and a defense that, had a limited version of Max Crosby. He didn't really do anything. We knew he was banged up and, probably should have just not played at all. Yeah. You take him away from this defense, and there's not a lot of above average players or even average players on it. So I think to come out the way that they did, they're up 14-0. KC did score twice in the second quarter to knot it up at halftime, but it really didn't put this one out of reach until late. I think early on it looked like, oh man, are we going to have a true disaster game for the Chiefs where we have to start talking about hitting the panic button after what we saw last week? But they got it together. You mentioned Pacheco. It wasn't a huge game for him on the ground. Had no big plays, but 15 carries for 55 yards, 2 1-yard touchdowns to put him on the board for fantasy. Rashee Rice came through in a big way, 8 for 107 and a touchdown. That was easily his best game of his career. Got a good trivia nugget for you here, Jeff. Rice became the first Chiefs rookie receiver with 100-plus receiving yards in a game since who in 2007?
2007. Jiminy Christmas. That's a long time ago.
Yeah. This guy was a fairly big name for a couple of years.
Dwayne Bowe?
Dwayne Bowe, baby.
Damn. Bowe. Yes. All right. Bowe, his career ended like that. And I was like, wasn't he supposed to, this guy's going to be a stud? And then all of a sudden he wasn't. I don't remember all the events that happened, but I thought he was going to be a thing for longer than he was.
Yeah, he had 15 touchdowns in 2010. Not that we need to go down a Dwayne Bowe tangent here, but 3,000-yard seasons. He was legitimately very good for some of those early 2010s Chiefs teams. Other than that, we had the pretty obvious Travis Kelce bounce back game. It feels like every time he has a critical error like he did last week, or just down a couple weeks, you're just waiting for that explosive game. And by his standards, this wasn't even that big of a game, but 6 for 91, you'll take that, getting him back on track. But most importantly, I think the Chiefs win, the Chiefs cover. They feel like they're moving in the right direction. I mean, this is tied for the most points that they've scored since week 3 when they put 41 on the Bears. This is their second highest scoring output of the entire year, which seems kind of crazy. But this is how they win games now. I mean, it's a defensive team that also has Patrick Mahomes.
Yes. And I'm still curious to see what they do to back him up next year. I mean, they keep on spending second-round draft picks on receivers, but they didn't add a receiver at the trade deadline. I don't know what their cap situation was like to be able to pull that off, but the cap is kind of not real anyhow. Yes, there's prices you have to pay, but it's usually just in the terms of cash, signing bonuses, things like that, converted into bonuses instead of salaries. And some owners are loath to do that, but they got to be doing that. Kelsey's getting older. And getting more prone to injury. I would think that they're going to have to do something to address that receiving core. Rice, though, it was good development for that. On the Raiders side, I mean, Josh Jacobs had that big long run, and he generally looked pretty decent. Jacoby Myers was pretty good. Adams had his share. O'Connell got banged up a little bit in this one, but he didn't miss a play. I think there was a timeout that allowed him to come back in, or maybe it was a third down where he got banged up and he was in to start the next series. But he actually looked okay in this one. They didn't do much in the second half, but this was a decent enough team.
Yeah, I think so. And, especially in the first half, they look frisky. They look confident. They're hitting downfield shots to Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers. Devontae did all of his work in the first half, though. 0 catches in the second half. We saw, the Chiefs defense buckle down in that regard. And same with Josh Jacobs. He had the big run I think, in the second quarter. And that was pretty much it. I mean, they put the clamps on the two most important players for the Raiders in the second half.
Yeah. It's kind of I thought I was going to get a cover on this one, but nope. The Raiders ran out of steam. They had a couple of turnover on downs to kind of put that out of reach. At 9.5, I thought that was going to be a good number for me here, and turns out all the favorites covered this week.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Is it like 13-2 heading into tonight? I think.
Yeah, something like that.
3?
Yeah. Won't somebody think of the poor sports books? But anyways. How about Denver, Cleveland? This is one where Denver they bullied Cleveland on this one here, which doesn't usually happen. Denver's defense, what a remarkable turnaround this unit has had. He gave up 70 to the Dolphins. Everyone remembers that, but everybody forgets that they were a ticket to the Carnival in the Washington game the week before too. Blew a big lead. That was the birth of Sam Howell as like this high volume passer guy that could put up tons of yardage. This is not that team anymore. They're a good defensive team.
269 total yards for the Cleveland Browns, which, part of it is their own doing, given what they're rolling out at quarterback right now. But No, you're right. Something changed. And, it wasn't only the Washington game and the Miami game. Right after the Miami game, they allowed 471 yards to the Bears and then 407 yards to the Jets, which, that's the equivalent of like allowing 1,000 yards to a normal team. But really since then, it was that Chiefs game in week 6, which they actually lost, but they played horribly on offense, but you can kind of tell, like, all right, there's something brewing here because they slowed down, Kansas City. And since then, teams have had a tough time even getting to 350 yards against them, even some of the better offenses that they face. So, yeah, props to the Broncos for getting the season turned around. At one point they were 1-5, and now here they are at 6-5. This is a team that very much has a chance to sneak into the playoffs. And, if they could beat Houston next week, I think they'll be in the driver's seat. The rest of the way, their schedule is not all that difficult. They have 2 games remaining against the Chargers, who right now feel very beatable. I think at worst, you probably split those. They do have to go to Detroit, but they get New England, they get the Raiders. So really this game against Houston coming up might decide, one of the playoff spots in the AFC. I never imagined a world, Jeff, where, after that Miami game and after that Jets game, I would be in a position where I'm forced to say good things and respect the Denver Broncos.
Yeah. It just shows what a reset league the league is, and too, how things can change so quickly in season. I do suspect they'll miss Kareem Jackson against the Texans.
Yes.
They did some headhunting against Cleveland too. They took out DTR at one point in time. They took out Amari Cooper. I think they got a flag on the Cooper hit, but not the DTR hit. If I recall correctly on that one there. But some of this is the Sean Payton thing. Who can we remember Bounty Gate? This is what he encourages his defenses to do.
Yeah, no question. I think they were flagged on the DTR hit, but not the Cooper one, which
I had
was correct. I think the Cooper hit, like the Browns were upset about it. There was some pushing and shoving and some jawing going on while Cooper was getting attended to. It was a clean hit. It was a hard hit, but I don't think there was anything nefarious about it. And X-rays are negative on Amari Cooper, so still a possibility that he misses time. But we're not dealing with broken ribs or anything like that. I think we maybe got fooled a little bit last week by the Browns, playing an advantageous opponent with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who left this game, and we got PJ Walker for a few sad possessions at the end. Which, by the way, I fell 1 rushing yard short on my DTR player prop.
Oh,
which
no.
I would like to think he would have gotten there had he stayed in the game, but that's neither here nor there. Browns started to get a little desperate during this game. They lost a fumble on like this weird like pitch back reverse play to Elijah Moore that was just doomed from the start. They tried to run a QB sneak with Harrison Bryant at quarterback on a 4th and 1. They fumbled that exchange and then lost the ball as well. So the Browns were very much in this early on, and then had a few things go against them, and kind of snowballed. You could just tell like Denver's picking up confidence, especially defensively, as the game went along. The Broncos have also gotten the ground game going, which not many people can do against the Cleveland Browns. They've had 120 plus rushing yards in 4 of their last 5 games. Completely neutralized Myles Garrett, who was just barely mentioned if you were watching this game live.
Yep.
And Denver, are they ultimately, even if they make the playoffs, are their team you really have to worry about? Like, no, I don't think so. But they found a formula here, which is run the ball, somehow get this defense turned around, and then use Russell Wilson in spurts, right? Still, it feels like 80% of the time He's just kind of out there game managing, but then every now and then, he'll make a throw on the run deep to Cortland Sutton, which we had one of those yet again this week. That kind of reminds you that, okay, he's still got it in there somewhere. He's not nearly the quarterback that he was 3-4 years ago, but he's also better than your typical game manager. He's gone 5 games straight now without an interception, which I think it's not necessarily the plan when you signed Russell Wilson, was to kind of use him as a limited version of himself, but it's working.
It is, and it's clearly they've done something there. They don't want to expose their defense as much, so they're slowing the game down. Jerry Jeudy got 3 targets, same amount as Marvin Mims, but Samaje Perine is more involved now. It's what they're doing. David Njoku had a really horrible drop in the end zone again this week. They did score on that possession. Harrison Bryant got it later, but they had to do like 2 more plays to get to it there. And it's just, I happened to use Njoku in DFS this week, so that was fun seeing that there. But yeah, they're just screening, they're running. This is what they do. The Broncos are doing right now, and it's kind of what the Browns need to do too, with their to not expose their quarterbacks. But you're right; those drives at the end were so sad.
They're just throwing the ball too much, man. Like, I mean, DTR threw it 43 times last week. Walker and Robinson combined to throw it 42 times this week. Like, I get you're playing from behind, and obviously at some point you got to do it. But even early in the game, it's just like Jerome Ford was ripping off yards every time he touched the ball, and he only carried it 9 times for 65 yards. Like, even Kareem Hunt, I thought, looked pretty good. Like, DTR, the runner, is something that they weren't really using all that much. Like, it just felt like there was kind of a miscommunication between like the personnel and the play calling. Like, they were calling the offense like it was still Deshaun Watson, and that's just, it's not going to get you very far against any average to above average defense. So I mean, Cleveland, when you're in this situation and you're starting Dorian Thompson-Robinson, you got to temper expectations, but I'll be interested to see what they look like on the road at the Rams. And Denver now heads out on the road for 3 straight games. And the last thing I'll say about this is, as great as the Denver turnaround has been on defense, I mean, they are forcing turnovers at a crazy rate. 15 turnovers forced to only 3 turnovers committed over the last 4 games. Like, at some point, that's going to come back around, right? You can't rely on forcing 3 to 4 turnovers every single week. And, if and when that dries up, I think we'll kind of need to see a little bit more out of this Denver offense. And look, that's probably going to happen next week at Houston. I think that's going to be a really fun game. And my early lean would be on the Texans there. I think this is a week that maybe Denver cools off.
Yeah, I think you might be right about that. There's been a tremendous amount of fumble luck, but also at the same time, Cleveland put the ball on the ground 5 times. 5 times. Denver did it twice themselves. So just a lot of fumbles in this game. Just an odd, disjointed game. Cleveland scheduled the rest of the way at the Rams, home against your Jaguars, home against the Bears, at the Texans, home against the Jets, and at the Burrowless Bengals in Week 18 there. They have 7 wins banked. So, I mean, they can just win. If they could go 3-3 the rest of the way, that probably gets them in the tournament.
I think it does, and it might depend on which games they win, right? Because you might need that, you might need a tiebreaker over a team like the Texans. And then they play Houston in Week 16. So that's going to be a huge one. But I think you're right. 3-3 is the target. I think you look at the Jets game as a win. You hopefully think you could beat Jake Browning in Cincinnati in Week 18. You probably could beat the Bears at home, but that Jags game, the Texans game, those are toss-ups at best. Probably games that you lose. And then at the Rams this week, who knows? I mean, that's going to be one of the more difficult ones on the slate.
Yeah, and yet still not insurmountable.
No, not at all.
They'll probably be like, we'll see who their quarterback is. Could be Joe Flacco. And Uncle said he could be worse. It is possible for him to be worse. Trust me. I've seen a bad Flacco. It could be worse, especially with no Cooper. So we'll see about that one there, if Cooper can play it or not as well. So lots to go there. I know you got a Hoops podcast coming up quickly. Do you want to talk anything about the Thanksgiving games? Give me your 2-minute Thanksgiving synopsis here.
Well, let's start with Packers-Lions. Not the result I expected. I keep waiting for this Green Bay team to regress back to what they've been earlier in the year. I thought this would be kind of a smash spot for the Lions. It didn't play all that well 2 weeks ago, and probably smarting a little bit with how you looked against Chicago, and somehow looked even worse at home in this spot against Green Bay. But you got to give more credit, I think, to the Packers than anything else. Jordan Love has now played, in my opinion, his best game of his career 4 times in a row. He just continues to get better and better. And part of the reason I liked Detroit in this one initially was all the injuries on the Green Bay side. I mean, you're without key players at basically every position on offense and defense, and they still controlled it from start to finish. It was really never in doubt after Green Bay went up 20-6 in the first quarter. Doing it with Christian Watson finally having his first true breakout game of the year. Malik Heath continues to look good. Jaden Reed made some plays for Green Bay. The Packers are 5-6 right now, and they're kind of like the Broncos of the NFC, where I'm not like fully believing that they're a dangerous team by any means, and I still don't think they make the playoffs, but I don't know, man. I mean, the path is there. Like if Minnesota loses tonight to the Chicago Bears, that becomes really interesting. We know Seattle, their upcoming schedule, they lost to the 49ers on Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
They got to go Dallas, San Francisco, Philly, their next three. So, suddenly the path is kind of there for the Packers. And I never thought I would say that.
Yeah, I know. And I was stunned at this game. I willingly ran on Thursday morning. Aaron and I did a turkey trot.
Oh, no.
And I picked up the game, I did all my updates right before kickoff and, went to do the race and I turned it on. I'm like, it's 20-6. It's not Lions. It's Packers.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Detroit this was such an odd, weird game too. There were so many fourth down fails by the Lions and then, they had a fumble 6 and all that. I mean, I want to just write it off, but now this is like 3 games we've had to write off with the Lions and that they're just not in that echelon of teams.
No, they're not. I mean, especially when Philly just continues to find ways to win every week, and San Francisco, looks better than ever. I think in other years they would be in the mix, but I think the two teams at the top of the NFC are just so good right now that a team like Detroit that has as much week-to-week variance, like you're not making it through that gauntlet unless Philly or San Francisco is really banged up.
And I think Dallas is better than Detroit too.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And they took care of business on Thursday against the Commanders. I was wrong. Riverboat Ron was not fired. They just fired the Jack Del Rio instead. But it's coming. Winter is coming here.
Yeah, I mean, we talked last week on the show. It's like, can the Cowboys really do this again? They're double-digit favorites for the 3rd week in a row, and this was as dominant of a win as they've had all year. Really, I mean, they've now won those 3 games as big favorites: 49-17, 33-10, and 45-10. So they kind of continued their streak of doing nothing but beating up on bad teams at home. And, now they welcome in the Seattle Seahawks on Thursday night and what to me could be another bloodbath. I think Seattle puts up more of a fight than the Commanders, but that's not really a team right now that you're scared to play.
Yeah. Seattle didn't really put up much of a fight on Thursday night. But for a pick 6, this game was just ugly.
Seattle, I mean, they did nothing, right? I mean, the pick 6 is really the only positive coming out of this game. I mean, they had like 20 yards of offense, I think, at one point in the first half, maybe even less than that. Honestly, I think it was like 9 yards of offense going into that final drive where they ended up missing a field goal. San Francisco is just back to being a wagon. Not much to say there. Christian McCaffrey got his 2 touchdowns. Pretty much everybody showed up. Deebo Samuel, 7 for 79. Brandon Ayuk had a touchdown. Really only had 2 catches, but still a nice fantasy day. The only blemish was that kind of weird pick 6 by Brock Purdy. But the Niners losing 3 games now feels like a distant memory.
Yeah, they get Philly this week. Little hat tip to Philly's schedule. You go KC, Buffalo, San Francisco, bam, 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 all in a row. That is just insane. And then Dallas after that, if I'm not mistaken, and Dallas before the bye also. I mean, and they've lost one game.
Yeah, to the Jets of all teams.
Yeah, and that's why they're probably not favored, but that's dumb. I mean, Phillies, and they were in the Super Bowl last year.
Not only are they not favored, I guess you're talking Super Bowl odds. I mean, they're 2.5-point home dogs to the Niners this week.
I didn't know that. Oh, yeah, that's
which
crazy.
I get it. I mean, it's like I think the Niners are the better team, but still 2.5 at Philly.
No, I'll be taking Philly.
Yeah,
I can tell you that. Unless like Hurts is hurt. He's banged up, but he's not hurt. So we'll see. Anyhow, that's all I got to say about that. But I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. We appreciate and they got through week 12 okay. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Nick is off to do NBA, and then we'll be back to do Sirius XM with me tonight. So, Nick, go rest those vocal cords for 15 minutes.
I'm gonna go get in my hyperbaric chamber real quick. Drink some honey, and we'll be right back at it. But yeah, looking forward. If you're listening along live or you're hearing this afternoon, check us out, Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio. We will be live from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be live during the first half of Vikings-Bears, which is always fun. I love doing these shows during games.
Absolutely. Should be a lot of fun, and hopefully have some live look-ins. If you want to check out our work, go to rotowire.com/pod. Get a free trial. Pick up, and no credit cards required. Just put in a valid email address, and off you go. And please remember to hit that like, subscribe button. It really helps us out a bunch here on YouTube if you're streaming with us. Thanks for listening, everybody. Take care.